Okay. All right. So, everyone, thank you very much for being here today. My name is Adam Carson. I'm with the Rockland County Planning Department. I'm also the executive director of the Rockland Municipal Planning Federation. Very quick housekeeping message. If you are a land use board member within Rockland County, just stay logged in and Zoom will record your attendance, and I will put that into the Federation's records. If you are a member of a land use board from outside of Rockland County, please send me an email afterwards with your name, municipality, and board, and I will get you a certificate of attendance. That's really it. Again, thank you for joining us in the middle of the workday. A little departure from our standard operating procedure, but I think it's well worth it. If you are fortunate enough to attend the Pace University Land Use Law Center's annual conference each December, you will recognize Mr. Elliott as a regular member of the most comedic quartet of land use lawyers around. It is a small sample size, perhaps, but they're quite amusing and they're also quite enlightening. Don Elliott is a genuine thought leader in the area of planning and zoning and land use. You may have seen many people with the initials AICP after their names. Mr. Elliott is FAICP, which means he's a member of the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Certified Planners, which is the highest honor the AICP gives. Don Elliott is an author. We have his most recent book here, An Even Better Way to Zone, Achieving More Affordable, Equitable, and Sustainable Communities, which is what he'll be primarily talking about today. He's also the author of A Better Way to Zone. He is also taught on the graduate level at the University of Colorado at Denver. He was a member of the Denver Planning Board. And most significantly, I believe he spent over 30 years working for Clarion Associates, which is a firm that assists communities all over in updating their zoning and development regulations. He's worked on zoning rewrites for Philadelphia, Indianapolis, and Albuquerque, and over 80 communities throughout the United States. So we are very fortunate to have Mr. Elliott with us today. Again, if you ever have a chance to attend PACE or some other place where he's speaking, I suggest you try to get there. But we have him on webinar today, coming from Maine, and I'm very grateful that he decided to give up a little bit of his vacation time to join us. And so with that, I will turn things over to him.
All right. Thank you very much, Adam, and thank you for inviting me. I'm going to spend just a minute to share my screen. We tried this in the testing phase and it worked, and so I'm going to try it again. Let's just see if it works. Here we go. Does that look good to you guys? Can you see it, Adam?
I can now see it, yes.
All right, great. Well, thank you all again for being here. I'm going to talk today about the most recent book. Adam mentioned it. It's called An Even Better Way to Zone, but by way of getting there, I'm going to do some background. So hang on a minute. Let's just do this. There we go. So if you look at the map on the right side of this page, that's where my firm Clarion Associates has worked, and that's what I've done for the last 30 years. I spent the first 4 years of my career as a real estate attorney, and then I spent the next 6 years as a planner for the city and county of Denver, and then 30 years working for this firm. And people kind of say, why'd you work for the same place for 30 years? And the answer is because every project was different. Planning and zoning all over. You can see we have an office in Denver. So there's a cluster of things in Colorado. We have an office in Chapel Hill. Those are the only two offices. And so there's clusters up and down the East Coast. But we've had the privilege of working in almost all the 50 states. And I personally worked on about 80 different codes. So one of the things that I like quotes, and I'm going to end this presentation with some quotes, but I should have put a slide on here just starting one. One of my favorite quotes is, we make our habits and then they make us. And I've kind of remembered that through my life. It takes some discipline to decide what you're going to do and what habits you're going to create, and they pay you back in great measure. Once you make your habits, they make you. And I think the zoning equivalent of that is we make our rules, and our community makes the rules, and then the rules do make the community. So I think zoning's important. I guess I could go back to here for now. I started my career writing a lot of plans, and I like planning. I have a master's degree in planning, but what I really realized was the world is not short of good ideas. There are many plans out there, and the old adage is they sit on the shelf, and that is too often true. So I decided to spend my career saying, okay, what can I do to make even some of the good ideas in those plans come to fruition? And the bottom line is, I think you can do three things. You can educate people to behave differently. You can spend money to build nice things that you didn't have before, sidewalks, parks, make our communities better. Or you can change the law and have every person or every investor and developer or building modifier or building change of use take you incrementally towards where you want to go. And I decided to spend my career doing that. And after 30 years or 40 years, if how you count it, I thought I knew a few things. And so this is why I wanted to write this second book. It's a book that says, when I go around the country and I say, what do you want your new development code to do? There are two automatic answers. Make it more readable so a citizen, a human being can understand it because they can't right now. And B, implement our comprehensive plan. We spent a lot of time on the plan, and now we need to get our rules aligned so that those decisions don't just gather dust, but that as people come in, not just the show placemaking projects, but everybody who comes in to adjust the built environment or the way we use it in our community will contribute towards taking us in that direction. And so that's number 1 and 2. Make it readable, implement our comp plan. 3, 4, and 5 are here on the screen. With almost no exceptions, when I worked in these 80 communities around the country, in Canada and a little bit overseas, they want more affordable housing, and that is because of the incredible hole we have dug ourselves for a variety of reasons. We could go into it, but I'm kind of tired of getting this data. I'd be amazed if your community doesn't have an affordable housing issue. Guess what? Everybody does. There are no communities out there that don't ask me to try to change the rules to make more affordable housing happen. Second is sustainable development. Well, that was a big deal when Al Gore made An Inconvenient Truth 25 years ago. And to my surprise, despite the recession of 2008 and despite COVID, that has remained a priority. It is very rare for me and my firm to be hired to write a code where somebody doesn't say, we should be more sustainable. We should be more resilient. We should not be contributing unnecessarily to greenhouse gases. It is a funny thing that it seems to resonate across the political spectrum and across the country. And the third one is equity. And I'll talk a little bit more about this. This may surprise you as a major theme. But I think, and I have noticed, there is a growing awareness in communities across the country that the economic and political system we have built in America, and we think we are a great democracy, and some days we are. We are a great democracy, and some days we act like it. But it also has inherent biases. And those biases make it easier for some people to succeed in America and harder for others, particularly in wealth generation, income, and public health. You probably all heard the adage, the biggest predictor of what quartile of income you will end up your career in is the zip code you were born in. Despite all the factors and all the things we do to try to open up education and retrain people and feed the creative spirit in America and the entrepreneurial spirit, it is very difficult for certain populations in America to succeed as well as much as others. And we kind of know that, and to my not surprise, but to my pleasure, I am pleased to say most communities look at that and say, we want our system to be fairer. We can't solve this problem, but we say America is not discriminatory, and we would like zoning not to be contributing to this problem. So when you rewrite it, find ways in which we can make our zoning code fairer to all of the communities and allow opportunities for the lower or less advantaged parts of our population that are also available to the more privileged parts of our population. And then there's an overarching theme in the book, and that one is redevelopment and reuse. I'll talk about this more in a moment, but a lot of codes are still written. I find greenfield ideas in it. We raised the bar. The last project was pretty. The last landscaping was better. Let's make that the standard for everything we do. And the truth is, most of what most communities deal with in zoning and development approvals is not new development. It's redevelopment. It's highly constrained redevelopment. So let's go on to that. Those may not resonate with you, but those are highlighted in the book, and I think they will. Some of them, certainly the affordable housing one, will. And of course, we are a nation of small governments, and you work for local governments. And so all of the ideas I'm going to go through don't apply everywhere. I've got a map of Colorado here. That's my home state. That's the one I know best. I could have put a map of New York, and it would be the same thing. It's not one place. The eastern plains of Colorado are different economically, politically. The Front Range of cities right along the foot of the Rockies is another place. The mountains are another place. The West Slope is another place. And they vary in terms of their economic health, their politics, their biases, and what is politically possible. And so the point here is that not everything can be done. No one can do everything that is discussed in this book. There are a lot of specific ideas. But I maintain, and I wrote the book because I think everybody can do something. You've got the same thing. New York in spades. You've got New York City. You've got the upstate. You've got Western New York. You've got some of the smaller secondary cities. I spent some time working with the city of Albany several years ago. You've got Long Island. They're all different places. And each one of the local governments in the places can do different things and cannot do other things. So here's the structure of the book. I hope you'll listen to this with the idea of what could we do, or what makes sense here, or what's achievable here, not, gee, a lot of this stuff doesn't work in my community. I divided the book into 9 chapters. The first 3 are kind of what we get wrong about our current approach to zoning. I'll talk in more detail about that. The middle 3 chapters are how to fix things. They're specific things. And I will talk about this more as we go along. In talking to the public about zoning, many people know it's broken. They dislike it. They can't understand it. All they know is that things that they wish hadn't been approved do get approved, or they didn't get approved when they took theirs in because the darn zoning ordinance got in the way. Zoning is not rocket science. Zoning is a set of rules and rewards. That's the book or the website of incentives and rules of what you can do and can't do. It's a set of procedures. How do you get a development approval? How do you change the rules? And it's the map which applies the rules. That's all it is. And I find the public can understand zoning because you can kind of say, look, are we talking about the map or the rules or the procedures? And dividing it that way can help people understand. And so that's where the substance of the book is divided. And finally, chapter 7 talks about what happens when these ideas trip over each other. The thing you could do for affordable housing will arguably not be as equitable as something else that you should do, or something you would do to promote sustainability will undermine the affordability of the resulting housing. How do you think through those things? So the last 3 chapters are kind of where do we go from here, and how do you think through the tensions in these ideas? First chapter is simply about the law background of zoning. Yes, its roots are quite racist. If you have not read The Color of Law, read it. I'll say it again. If you have not read The Color of Law, read it. It is very important. Land use zoning is an outgrowth of early attempts in the 20th century for overtly racist zoning. That was overturned on contract grounds, not on fairness or civil rights grounds, but on the right that you can't prohibit somebody from selling their property to somebody else, white, black, or otherwise. But very soon after that, we got land use zoning, and the defense in the courts of land use zoning included things like, we need this tool to preserve the race. It is not true that land use zoning is unconnected with some of the racial biases in our history. They are connected. We don't want them to be. We don't mean it. When we show up for a planning commission meeting, we're not thinking that way. We may be thinking exactly the opposite. Most people would be thinking exactly the opposite. But it's important to understand the background, because some of the traces of how it works and how it was designed still are there. And I'll go into that in a minute. And then those are the 3 topics. Zoning has contributed on affordability and unfair systems and poor sustainability. It's not the only culprit. Gee, Don, zoning can't fix these problems. Yes, you're right. It can't, but it should not be contributing to them. And here's the deal. Zoning, unlike real estate finance, unlike mortgage criteria, unlike subsidies for affordable housing, are things you can deal with at the local level. Almost all zoning is done at the local level. So if you're looking for ways to change what you think are problems in the community or with the local a development context, zoning, among the major contributors to these problems, is in closer to being within your control than almost any other factor. And that's why I wrote the book. Second chapter talks about this, and this is, I'll go quickly, but DNA, zoning was designed to exclude. It sounds so simple, but it is fundamental. Zoning can prevent the market from doing what you don't want it to do where you don't want to do it. It cannot make the market do things that the market doesn't want to do. This is not like all we have to decide is yes or no, yes or no. Yeah, we like it here. We'd like it over here, so we'll make the zoning easy. Well, if the market doesn't support it, you're not going to make that happen. You can't make yes to the good things happen. You can try. And the book is full of ideas about how you can make it more effective in doing so. But if you don't get it right and the market doesn't have enough incentive to do it, it's not going to happen. On the other hand, no matter how hard the market wants, you can stop it from happening. It is not a parallel situation. Zoning wakes up in the morning and thinks about exclusion. And it thinks about it in all three of these elements: the rules, the procedures, and the map. But here's we can change that basically. But there's limits to what you can do. And it's important to realize that because zoning was designed to exclude, we over-exclude. A lot of the problems I've seen in 30 years of zoning are, why don't you allow this here? Answer, we don't remember. Answer, we had a Monday night amendment that amended the B1 district, and no one asked whether that was a sensible change in B2, B3, B4. So we exclude, nobody ever asked a question. But the point is, and that's something I'll talk about more later on, often because zoning is most effective in excluding what we don't want, we have excluded many things for no good reason. And in fact, I've had this experience with a number of my clients going through it. I also think one of the issues with zoning is we make 5, I call them thought mistakes, and these are the 5. As I said earlier, zoning, when I read zoning codes for even a city like Denver's is weird, so I won't use that, a landlocked central city that is not going to annex land, I find all kinds of first-time development ideas in there. Imagine a blank sheet of paper, and this is the type of housing we would like. Answer, question, how much of your city is raw land? Very little. It is mostly reuse and redevelopment, and that's not a blank sheet of paper. There are utilities, often in the wrong place. There's trees that you prefer not to take down. There's terrain that is not flat and square. There are neighbors that are going to or should not be next to what's going on, or could be next to what's going on. My point is that it's not first-time development. If you're in a mature city, almost every question is not the zoning question is not what should this be? It's what should this be next? And the answer to what should this be next is very closely connected to what could it be next. And that's not a blank sheet of paper. Lots of things cannot happen easily or financially feasibly on land that's already been developed. Too focused on first-time development. Even when we think of infill, we often forget to think about those constraints. Yes, technically the market would support this in this area if we had enough traffic capacity, but we don't on this road. Or if this was a walkable street, but it's not, it's a state highway. We're not thinking about, we still think as if the infill sites, even when it's not first-time development, we hypothesize kind of perfect infill sites. There are no perfect infill sites. If it was perfect, it would have been redeveloped long ago. Wealthy thinking in a lower income world, I've referred to this before. I have made my living trying to help communities implement their comp plans. Those comp plans are aspirational, and they often call for higher development quality, more trees, more open space, less lot coverage in some cases, more walkability, more infrastructure improvements. We want sidewalks everywhere, and we want everybody to pay for them. I'm just using these as examples. Every one of those things raises the cost of development. That's not always wrong, but it is something we don't think about. We focus on what would we like, not the cost of it and what it's going to do not to those who can afford and have already chosen to afford to live in our communities. What's it going to do to the people who have the least income in our communities, who actually are hanging on to a single family home or a business by very little financial means, would like to invest in it, could invest if you hadn't just raised the bar? So the question, and not to mention the usual question that planners scratch their heads and say, what about the people who would live in our community if they could? Now, I know some communities are very happy to put up the drawbridge and say, well, that's tough. I don't like those people anyway. But most planners don't. They would like the community to be open to people who, firefighters, teachers, those who work for a living, those who change the tires on your car, those who fix your car. Mine's in the shop right now. Those guys should be able to live somewhere near. So planners tend to not be the ones, in my opinion, throwing up the drawbridge, but we incrementally make things more expensive in ways that we don't think about enough. Slow thinking in a faster world. Time is money to builders. Time is particularly important to small companies, family investments. We have a store, we have a retail store, and we need to make it bigger, we need to make it better. And I can't hang on to, or a development opportunity. I finally bought a lot, I want to build a house on it. Whatever it is, it takes time. Hurts the momentum of bringing your community where you want to go, and hurts women-owned business more. Why? Because they're smaller and less well-financed. Minority-owned businesses more. Why? Because they're smaller and they're more financed. Time hurts. Time-consuming approval procedures, continuing the hearing for another month, costs us, and it costs the least privileged parts of our community most. Again, it's just we don't think about the fact that time is not your friend when it comes to development of review approvals. People like it, and if they're not getting their way, they're happy to ask for it to be delayed. That is usually not a cost-free option. Big companies can roll it in for another month and carry the project because they're making money on other projects. Small ones can't. And finally, picture book thinking. Even though I like placemaking and I love pictures, I like all my codes have pictures about what's going, or drawings about scale, form, how it relates to the lot, how it relates to neighbors, where's the parking, where's the building. But tying your zoning to a particular infill picture of what you want to happen here often turns out to be unproductive because it leads people to think that can happen. And often it can't. It was a result of a planning process or an infill visioning process or a charrette or just planners thinking in the back room about what would fit in here. But the point is, if it could easily be redeveloped, in many cases, it would have been redeveloped already. I had a developer tell me years ago, he said, Don, development is generally net fishing. You figure out what the market's buying, you get a piece of land, you throw out your net, and some of the market swims into your net, and you get the sales and profits. Infill and redevelopment is spearfishing. I have to find something that no one else thought of, and hopefully is not too different that I get denied. But the point is, if I'm being held up against a picture of what they wanted when they didn't know how hard this site was to redevelop, then that's not helpful. Now I've got to dig myself out of a hole. Those are the 5 changes. So I'm going to now go through the substance of the book. As I said earlier, the 3 substantive topics I want to address, and I'm only going to do like 1 or 2 slides on each one. So I don't have great depth. Those chapters 4, 5, and 6 are the meat, the substance of the book. And if you buy the book, I hope you focus on those because they have lots of specific ideas. I'm going to focus on just a few. Down at the bottom, I put in this: restrictive covenants are not the answer because last year a very important book was written called that said basically zoning. Well, 2 years ago, Nolan Gray's Arbitrary Lines book, and I respect Nolan a lot, and I think it's a good book. It's a very comprehensive documentation of the problems that zoning has created and why, unless we're careful, it will continue to create those problems. But I disagree with his conclusion. His conclusion was it's so broken we could get rid of it. And he doesn't overtly say it, but the examples he gives are like Houston. We should just do this with restrictive covenants. I don't think that works. And the book goes into 4 different reasons why we should be even more suspicious of the biases that occur when you try to rely on restrictive covenants as a land use control mechanism rather than public law. So I won't go into that today. I can answer questions if you want, but I'm going to focus just 1 slide on these 2 that are listed as 4.1, 2, and 3. Housing, 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 and affordable housing is what everybody seems to be focused on these days. But a lot of our thinking is we should allow missing middle. I agree. We should allow a wider variety of housing in our single family zones. I agree. We should leaven up and have more housing near transit. I agree. But all those thinking, most of that thinking is about production. How do we change zoning to increase the production of housing? And I'll just say this, and if you haven't heard it from another source, Don and you and I, everybody here knows more housing alone will not solve the affordability problem. There are people who will not be able to afford it no matter what you do. But in my opinion, I think I'm right. There is no solution to the affordability problem that does not involve more housing. A lot more housing. The market's ability in the end to bring down the cost of housing to where it is less out of reach for people who earn livings in the United States is much more powerful than local government's ability to subsidize or use smoke and mirrors to get it. We can, and I talk about them in the book. That is not the most important part. You cannot steer the US economy from government when the market is where all the energy is. So, yes, housing production is very important. You need to harness it to get where you're going. The book talks about that. Affordability strategies talks about subsidies, talks about deed restrictions, talks about incentives. Yes, we absolutely need that. It's fraught with difficulty. Every government intervention into the market has consequences, and often they are unintended consequences. How do you minimize the chances for unintended consequences when we say, no matter how much housing we get, and no matter how much supply increases, people in the 20 to 50% AMI are going to have a hard time renting or buying housing. That's a huge problem, and it's not going away. And maybe in 1951 the market could solve that problem, but it actually couldn't, because we started doing public housing in 1937. It's almost a century, 90 years, that we have admitted our wonderful market system, and I mean that sincerely, it does a lot of great things very well, cannot solve the problem of housing people safely at the bottom end of our economic system. And our ability to force that floor of economics up is very limited. So the market and government need to find a way to reach down to make that happen. Housing preservation strategies is simply about the fact that, look at that slice. The housing, I'm being generous, the housing supply expands about 3% a year. Some of the best economists look at me and laugh and say, Don, it's more like 1% a year. But the bottom line of that is 97% of the housing we'll have next year, we already have. 94% that we'll have 2 years from now, we already have. 91% that we have 3 years from now, we already have. So why do we allow the most affordable parts, naturally occurring affordable housing, to be demolished for luxury housing? We have, everybody deserves the right to buy a lot, tear down the house, and build a big one for their family. But just be aware, we don't have a planning conversation very often that says, what did we gain there? Well, we gained tax base. That's not to be laughed at. That's real money that supports local government. But we lost a housing unit that was, in many cases, much more affordable, actually affordable without government subsidies or a deed restriction or an income verification system. It just was old, not very good housing that still housed a household safely. And we lost it for a very expensive house. We didn't gain one housing unit. We lost an affordable one. We gained an expensive one. And the only thing we got out of it was more tax base. Again, I'm not laughing at it, but you're going to have a hard time gaining tax base through new houses fast enough to create subsidies to make up for the affordable unit you just lost when you allowed it to be torn down. So we need to think about that. So one idea for each one of these, and I have many in the book, but one of the things that upsets me most is kind of DU per acre and lot area per dwelling unit density limits. I do think the form-based approach is a better approach. Figure out what fabric will work in the different neighborhoods in your community, and then let the market decide whether that house, whether that apartment building has 8 or 10 units. Don't arbitrarily limit it. Parking is often a limit, but parking is also going away in many communities, or every community I've ever worked with has reduced their parking requirements. Now a growing percentage of them are just getting rid of them. I acknowledge often parking is all you need. You don't need to say 3 units to the acre in your plan and then zone to 3 units per an acre. I'm not a fan of these things. And I think it directly produces fewer housing units that are bigger and more expensive than we want it to do. And it's our own fault. We took a planning concept, dwelling units per acre, and we turned it into a code when the world has changed in such a way that that is having very serious unintended consequences. Housing affordability strategies, all I'll say here is you do this through incentives. If you want to incentivize deed restricted housing or lower income housing than the market wants to build, we offer incentive, more density, more height, whatever it is, less parking, more lot coverage. Just be aware, if you're trying to hold out carrots to get the market to go deeper into the affordability realm than it wants to or can afford to, they have to be big carrots. I've worked in a number of communities that say we offer a 10% density bonus, a 10% height bonus, a 10% parking reduction. And most builders I talk to say, don't make me laugh. I can't, that will not change my pro forma. I've actually had a couple of them over many decades say, Don, when you tell me it's a 30% bonus, I'm listening. That's worth me going back and saying, instead of 10 units, I could build 13, but I'd have to keep a couple of them affordable. I will go back and redo my math. But unless it's a big carrot, this kind of diddling around with 10% and 15% bonuses, in my experience, is not effective, does not work. And so finally, housing preservation strategies. Here's an idea that I've written several articles about. I've had fewer tomatoes thrown at me than I expected. What if we had an overlay zone? We have historic preservation overlay zones. I live in one. They limit what I can do to expand my house because of its historical character, because we like it. It's cute, it's history, it's pretty. We want to keep it. If we can limit my property rights and your property rights because it's cute and historic, why can't we limit it because it's affordable? And one of the ideas that has come up that I have endorsed is that what if we had a rule that said you can expand, if you got a house under 1,500 square feet, you can expand it by 25% or 20% every 5 years. Want to add a room? Okay. You got room on your lot to do it? Okay. That's fine. But we're going to take the speculative value of that lot out by saying you cannot buy it and take it down and build a bigger house and just replace it with a 3-story house. We're going to say, if you're buying this, and this happens a lot these days in parts of the country, I'm buying it for the lot value. The house is useless. I'm taking down the house because I'm using it for my lot. I love the neighborhood. You could, and we could, and I will bet you it could be defended, although I haven't seen exactly this proposal, a thou shalt not expand and exist or have more than 25% expansion in the square footage on this lot more than every 5 years. You can't do that more than 20%. Incrementally, you can expand your house. Can you take down a bungalow and replace it with a McMansion? No, you may not in these neighborhoods, because we will never get that affordable housing back. As I just said, in order to get that level of affordability, you would need such deep subsidies that the property taxes you're getting out of these new houses is not going to get you there. So these are 3 big things. Ask the why not question. The real question, and I've had this experience, go into your code, go into your list of districts and uses by right, conditional uses. Every code I've written in the past 30 years, we have made more conditional uses by right, subject to some limits, but objective limits that a staff can do, not a public hearing. Why? Because no one today agrees that it should be excluded or should require a process. That is lost in the mists of time, the reasoning, if there ever was one. And even if it is, the affordability issue generally leads people to say, no, we need to be allowing this. I do want to make a word about this. Just you can read the words on the slide. I get comments, people saying, Don, I wouldn't mind more housing in my neighborhood as long as it was ownership housing. I believe in wealth generation. I want my kids, or I want everybody. I want lower income people to be able to buy a house so they can generate wealth. It's very important to the American dream, life path. But I'm not into rental, not that I'm against rental people, but it's not a form of wealth generation except for the owner of the property. Zoning is not good at addressing this. Again, in some states, it's illegal to distinguish based on the ownership status of the zoning. Think about how hard this would be to enforce. You can create more units, but only if they're owner occupied. I have worked in countries where they have done exactly this. And what it does is create a black market. If I must live in this house as a condition of buying it, I will for a while, and then I will rent it below the surface. And you will have a very hard time catching me, or vice versa. I don't mean to disparage everybody, but I'm telling you that this has happened in rent control jurisdictions too. And I'm not having a discussion about rent control. When you create a rule like this, which will require a lot of intrusive administration to make sure nobody's cheating, and the market has very great motives to cheat, people tend to just break the rule. It's not an enforceable thing through zoning. Once again, the ability to rent out your assets is an important part of liquidity and basically discouraging rental property. There are people who will rent their whole lives. A lot of Europe always rents, never buys. Now, we're not Europe, but we all know there are people in America who will need to rent their entire lives. When you artificially prevent rentals from happening, that's who you're hurting. So who's really being helped and who's hurting? We need a yes and approach. I go through all of these things and I don't need to read it. You forget them. All housing conferences deal with all these things. Parking standards, I really want to discuss, except that I will tell you, 10 years ago, I'd say, yeah. A few places get rid of their parking standards or parking minimums, not very many. It's a growing curve. I've changed my mind. I have seen enough cities get rid of it. And you know what? I know it's unpopular. I know. On the web. I'm
Sorry
sorry.
about that. I was trying to shut my phone off completely.
Are you okay? Can I keep
I'm
going?
fine. Yes,
That's
I'm
fine.
sorry.
That's fine. So I want you to read the last line there. There is very strong evidence that the market really can handle this. Yes, there will be some overflow. I make the big point. Be careful, guys. We have a serious housing problem to solve, and that housing is for human beings, not for pieces of metal. You can't let the parking tail wag the housing dog. It's very bad planning. Here are two new initiatives on affordability. Just so you know, the Common Sense Institute has branches in many states, and they have a new template code out. I worked on it with them, which is basically kind of very small houses on very small lots. How simple could we make this? If we had the political will to do this, not Levittown, but in an infill parcel that could be made financially feasible for housing, if we allowed the kind of housing that we allowed after World War II, how simple could we make that text? They have written some that might be worth you're looking at. And the Lincoln Institute has something called I'm Home, which is trying to research best practices and come up with a template, a much more updated template for manufactured homes, both on individual lots and on parks. I will say this, manufactured homes parks are not the first choice of housing in most places. It is about the most affordable housing we are going to get. And when you get down into the lower income ranges, we're going to have to see more of it. And most of the codes I've looked at have antiquated. I mean, they're really, really antiquated manufactured home standards. There are much better models out there, and the state of the art is much better. So they're trying to codify or to at least promulgate the fact that these should be allowed in more places and could be allowed in ways that would be neighborhood acceptable. So simplifying reuse and redevelopment. I just want to say this is part of the sub-theme of the book. Most communities have an oversupply of at least churches and schools. That's where we first saw this. And so why aren't we loosening up the use controls? Yeah, the school's been vacant for a long time. What would be so bad with childcare, art gallery, yoga, low impact uses? And that's happening in a lot of communities. But now, thanks to COVID and online shopping, we have a lot of vacant office buildings and strip retail. So ask the why not question. Go into those zone districts where you have vacancy rates and loosen them up. The vacant buildings themselves are a drain both from property tax point of view, but just from things break when they're not maintained. They become nuisances. They become gathering spots. And the point is, put them back to use. Don't let zoning be the reason vacant buildings that are still usable are sitting vacant because nobody's bothered to go through the code and figure out how to make them usable again. Zoning's not that hard to do. This is happening widely in most codes, opening up commercial zones to housing and secondary uses. Yes, we'd like the retail sales tax. Yes, we would like the greater property tax of commercial. How long are we going to sit staring at this building and wishing for something that is probably not going to happen? And when will we say, let's be sensible and get some activity in there? The building code is often the barrier, but that's changing too. I'm just as removal of parking standards is a rising curve around the country. Revisiting building codes, not just on the 3-year cycle, the residential code and the commercial code, but especially looking at it and saying, where did this line come from that says 2 units in a building are governed by the residential code, but 3 or more is covered by the manufactured housing fire code? Much more expensive to do. The difference between 2 and 3 is huge in terms of the ability to pay for the fire safety issues that are needed in a house. Who made that call? It wasn't in the 10 Commandments. It's not cut in stone. It's a trade-off between affordability and safety. And I'm not minimizing it, but I want you to go think about it. If we really believe that that we really wanted maximum fire protection, maybe we wouldn't even allow duplexes to go into the residential code. We've already decided that's okay. And there are a number of communities around the country that are saying, yeah, you know what? And we can move it to 3 or less. And there's some that are looking at it and saying we can move it to 4 or less. Obviously, it means a very difficult conversation with fire folks, and I have great respect for them. But this is a public policy issue. There's no line in the sand over between 2 and 3 units. And right now, that is contributing to the issue in a way that is, somebody decided somewhere in the past, it could have been 5, it could have been 4, we decided 2. But that's a public policy decision as to where that line should be drawn. New preservation tools. I've already talked about this, so I'm not going to talk about it more. I do want to talk, now I'm in equity, then I'll do just a couple slides on sustainability. I like this slide because I think it encapsulates one of the fundamental thought mistakes we make. In law, that left circle in the top left says under the Fair Housing Act, you can't discriminate based on race, gender, color, religion, national origin, or limited physical or mental abilities. Can't do it. It's illegal. And Congress made it illegal in 1968 and made it stronger in 1988, and they have not gone back. I think that's enough to prove it's lasted through Republican and Democratic administrations. We mean this. America, at some deep level, means that they don't want the law to be doing this, and they don't want people to be doing this. There are exceptions. It's not a perfect law, but it has remained the law of the land for almost 60 years now. And no one seriously says we should repeal the Fair Housing Act. Why? It's facially discriminatory and unfair in a way that we say is un-American. But in America, there's nothing to prevent you from raising the price of housing to where an increasing number of families can't afford it. We don't do it deliberately. We do it by raising the bar. And sometimes there's an exclusionary nature in there too. But that's the right-hand top circle. The problem is these circles overlap. Women-headed households make less money. When you raise housing prices, they get hurt more. Black and brown households make less money. When you raise housing prices, they get hurt more. Households headed by folks with disabilities, limited abilities, make less money. Disabled people in general make less money. When housing gets more expensive, we know who it hurts. And it's exactly who we tell our children we don't want to hurt. We ignore the fact that money has a lot to do with equity. Equity works through affordability. Often. This is a good publication of the American Planning Association. I was one of the 8 authors of the Equity and Zoning Guide. I think it has 84 different ideas of how to make zoning more equitable. But the bottom line is, think about it not in terms of just housing, which I had on the previous slide. Equity means those households in your communities with less resources, less going in their favor in terms of income or education or family situation, need a way to earn a living. Go back through the code and try to figure out where your code is prohibiting people from earning a living, either in a freestanding place or at home through home occupations, in ways that are based on stereotypes. They're not based on impacts. It is sad how often I get into a code and say, these 3 uses have the same impact, land use impact, traffic impact, etc. Why is one not possible? I know the answer to that question. It's based on stereotypes of who will own this business and who will go to this business. And at some deep level, they're considered second-class businesses, second-class operative. That's just made it significantly harder for people with limited employment opportunities to actually survive. And when you look at this again and ask the why not question, make sure just have a conversation with the public that makes it very clear that your discussions are going to be based on reality, not on land use, not on stereotypes. Quality public services, make sure that your zoning doesn't prevent things that are particularly needed in lower income and black and brown neighborhoods that are predominantly black or brown or lower income. And then public health risks. There's a lot about we can do to try to prevent the continuation of pollution or impacts on households through zoning that when they're getting a disproportionate part of those negative impacts. Always ask this question. We tend to focus on whose life will be made better with this zoning change. We don't think through, and what will the market do in response? And whose life will not be made better by this and might be made worse? So just think about it. Sustainability, I'm going to go fast now, so we have a little bit of time for questions. This is the third topic. Remember, affordability, equity, sustainability. I'm amazed at how many communities don't take this seriously, particularly in the West. In my area, it's wildfire. Think about it. Flood risks we have a national system to deal with it. It's a highly imperfect system, but it does discourage and provides incentives for people not to build in areas where floods are going to wipe them out and hurt people and hurt buildings and cause unnecessary harm. Yes, it's imperfect. I've never worked in a community that thought their flood maps were right, but it is what it is. So, but nobody wants really, there are a few voices, but most of the time we say, we're not going to repeal that. Then you just have people being opportunistic and building where they really shouldn't. Same is true for wildfire. Same is true for coastal rise. Same is true for areas that are going to erode more thanks to disruptions of greater storm events and more infrequent and more unpredictable storm events. So use the maps. Are they right? No, they're imperfect. Use them. They're better than not doing it. This is public health and safety. Why are we not looking at the risks that climate is changing and saying, we're not going to make this worse by allowing people to make major investments when we could prevent that, or we could help it be a less intrusive, a less risky investment. And then here are the other things you can do for sustainability. Anything you do for mixed use generally tends to reduce vehicle miles traveled and the length of them, and bike travel and increase pedestrian stuff. Mixed use is happening everywhere. It's worth continuing to think through. We have a lot of use separation from 1916 still in our codes that has no public benefit. Improve connectivity, allow renewable energy. Every code I've written in the last 25 years allows more community scale and small scale renewable energy in more places than the one it replaces. And then food production is not a big deal, but if you don't address it, when you talk sustainability, somebody will raise it in the audience, and there are easy things you can do to make that better and to allow it to happen. The question is not, are you going to feed the country based this way? No, you're not. We have a very effective national food system. Why are you preventing this? And the answer is, I don't know why we're preventing this. So allow it. Fixing the procedures is important. Many affordable housing builders tell me the procedures are just as important to both equity and affordability as the rules themselves. I'm going to skip through the legal framework. There is not a whole lot there, but I will go to this quote. Somebody once said, if you want to look like you did something good without risking that anything will change, adopt a good zoning rule and a complicated zoning procedure to apply it. Anybody know who that was? It was me. If you make the code, if you adopt ADUs, put conditions on it, and then make everybody go through a beauty contest with their neighbors to get it approved, great. You go home and say, I allowed ADUs, and you have no fear that you'll ever get any ADUs. Don't gum it up with procedures. We have way too many procedures and too many time-consuming procedures. I have a system here. I have a chapter that talks about the different major issues you need to think about. It's not that hard. There are a limited number of things that affect local government powers. It may seem complicated to you constitutionally. It's not that complicated. And I go into more depth in the first book I wrote several years ago called A Better Way to Zone. I did put this in, and I think this is worth promoting. I really thought I'd be yelled at for this, and I have only been yelled at in the sense that I should have done more of it. When we talk zoning and development decisions, those columns show how big they are. Community-wide rule, a new code, yeah, very important to have the public involved. The first line is public input. And the risk that people's biases will about their neighborhood will affect the new plan, not that high. In the middle of, and then we go to neighborhood wide rules, topic, things like ADU rules, site-specific rezoning decisions, and on the right, site-specific project approval, design review for something that meets zoning, environmental studies review for something that meets. I know you have secret. I've worked in New York State, but I want you to focus on this structure. I think this is how we lead it. The public does not have to be involved in every zoning decision that's made. It may be the tradition in your community. Almost every code I've written has moved the needle on this to say, no, at the right-hand side, minor conditional use approvals and site-specific project approvals for things that meet the basics of zoning. They're not asking for a variance because it's too tall. They're going through a discretionary review in a public hearing when they already have invested and meet the letter of the code up to this point. I think the need for public input is low. Almost every city I've moved to has administrative site plans, and most of them go to administrative conditional use approvals. If the answer is maybe yes, maybe no for this use and location, write it down. What makes it yes? What makes it no? Don't put you in front of the public and bring out a high risk that people will vote based on their self-interest and will undermine something you need as a community, but you have not, but the neighbors don't want it on this particular site. So that's an interesting part of the book. I call this the negative trifecta, and then I'll get on to my last couple slides. These are what you can do. And I know everybody can't do all of them. I know New York state law requires hearings in certain cases. I know there are appeal rules, but take a look at your code. These are important, not just for affordability, but for equity and for getting the creative types of development we need for more sustainable development. Reduce the number of times you ask for an individualized traffic or parking or environmental study. Do macro ones for neighborhoods or for the community as a whole, in order that you don't put the smallest and most vulnerable investors and businesses in the business of doing expensive studies for what is likely to be a very minimal impact. Public hearing requirements I've talked about. This is very important. Even when less privileged people and less wealthy people are in the room, and we got them all in the room at the same time, they would often lose the zoning debate to people who know how local government functions better, can show up at more hearings, speak better English, know from their advisor how to speak to the zoning criteria. Public hearings tend to be a major way that we perpetuate the land use patterns we have. Many of them are not necessary. And in the guise of saying we're just trying to be fair, they are, in my opinion, a major way we perpetuate low opportunities for many parts of our communities. Get rid of them if you can. If it can be made administrative and subject to objective standards, do it. Get rid of those vague and objective standards. Allow some administrative adjustments. Your code can allow staff to approve a 2-foot variance in setback requirements for the following reasons. Utilities are in the wrong place. There is mature trees in the wrong place. There is a terrain issue that we can't get around here. You can write down the type of site-specific conditions that you want to delegate to staff the ability to adjust or fudge the following things: height by 2 feet, parking by 1 space, lot coverage by 10%, whatever it is, and authorize them to say, look, when you review this project, you don't have to go for a variance. We're not going to have a hearing on this. This is silly. Gearing up people over a 1-foot setback or a 1-foot dormer encroachment. A year from now, nobody will even know that happened, let alone 10 years from now. And getting the public all wound up and the public expense of going through a hearing is nonsense. It's close enough. We've told you what close enough is. It's in the code. You have authority to do it. Document it. If you want to appeal it, that's great. But appeals can be narrowed by making you cite exactly what provision of the code has been used wrongly. You don't have to allow second bites at the apple, which some communities do. Look, I lost at that round. Let's see if I can appeal it and get a second bite at the apple. We'll strengthen our arguments. And who knows, maybe they'll run out of money along the way. I'm sorry to be harsh about this. Appeals are increasingly used as delay tactics. That's a stupid use of appeals. That's not the intent. Appeals are intended to find mistakes. When your code is clear and it has objective standards, there will be few mistakes and there will be fewer appeals and there will be less delay at getting what your plan said you wanted and you need in this location. And your plan said you need in this location, but the immediate neighbors would prefer not to have right here. I'm going to stop here. I've got 4 minutes left to go. I will point out that Chapter 7 talks about how to resolve these tensions. I won't go through these slides, but they can make them available to you. And I do want to point out that I know that this is not new for many of you. There's the issue. The issue is not that you don't want to do some of these things. The issue is building public support. And so I do want to say this. I am constantly surprised by how many people there is a rational middle of the room, and that's who you're talking to when you talk about these things. Ignore the antis, ignore the pros. You're trying to get the middle of the room to understand what you're doing. They don't have to stand up and cheer. They just have to show up and not show up and object. And many people will. You want to be, when they walk out of the room, you want the middle range who actually came to learn or came to object. You want them to come out and say, you know what, the planner was the most reasonable person there. Get rid of the rental bias. Remind people that almost everybody in the room and all elected and appointed officials rented at some point in their lives. Highlight the equity impacts. When I talk to people who have made major changes in their codes, they said, we talk about the fact the current system hurts the people we don't want to hurt, and that makes a difference. And finally, if you're rewriting your code, allow the consultant who is working with the public a lot of access to elected officials. The trust that is built through having honest conversations, giving honest answers, is how codes get adopted, how hard decisions get made. I honestly believe in many cases, the code I wrote comes and gets adopted unanimously, and many of the council members have never read it. But they know the process was fair. There were good answers to every question. There were lots of engagement opportunities. They look around the room, and the only objectors are the ones that always object. And they realize the process has been fair. This is hard work. And if the process is fair, my job as an elected official is to go with what we've decided to propose. So I'll leave 1 minute. There we go. Sorry, I'll turn off this now. Sorry. I always run long.
That's fine. Appreciate your time. I did put my email in the chat. Mr. Elliott offered to share his slides. Perhaps if you just send them to me, I will distribute them if anyone wants. My email is also there for people from outside of Rockland who need a certificate. We do have a question. It came from someone, an anonymous attendee, but I strongly suspect that they attended the last Pace University Land Use Law Center because there was a presenter discussing this. What do you think about the hypothesis that as the baby boomer generation die, the housing market will fall sharply due to the lack of people being able to buy these houses that are coming onto the market, which will lead to municipalities losing chunks of their tax base and struggling to support their oversized due to suburban sprawl infrastructure?
Well, I'll give you a 1 minute answer. The economic data and the housing market data I have seen, there's several changes there. Is not that we're going to have absolute population decline within our lifetimes. We're seeing fewer children in younger women. We're seeing some of that loss made up in older women. So we're not actually seeing the declines that we thought we were seeing in family size. What I have seen in the housing economics is we still have an undersupply of housing, but more seriously, we have a mismatch of housing. We have more small households and more big suburban houses designed to raise 3 or 4 kids. And those two things don't match. So I think the challenge for many communities is going to be, how do you allow those larger houses to be put to some form of use? And at a minimum, it's going to be to allow occupancy by larger numbers of people. That's what we're seeing. The larger families are moving out to the suburbs. Most of the smaller households prefer to live closer in, but it's a mismatch. And so I think I do not think that this country is at any risk of having an oversupply of housing. It is at risk of not adjusting the use of its existing housing stock to match the ever smaller households we have, and then our buying power leading many families to need to live together. We got to allow that. It's just going to happen. It's just part of economics. So sorry I hope that's the best answer I can give in the time available.
Okay. All right. Well, that was the only question I saw in the Q&A. I mean, I could ask you a bunch of questions myself, but we are at noon. I appreciate everyone's time, and I appreciate your time very much. So perhaps I'll just have to waylay you at the next conference I find you with my other questions. But with that, I don't want to keep you or anyone else any longer than I promised. So I'll just say thank you very much for everyone. Thank you all the board members out there giving up again more of your time. I always try to thank you for the time that you give to your communities. And thank you very much to Don Elliott. I would encourage you to buy his book. It is readable, but it is still in depth, and it's something that anyone can make sense of, but it covers quite a lot of material, and I think it's very worthwhile. And thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Elliott.
Thank you for inviting me.
All
Thank you.
right.
Bye bye.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye bye.